Hi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Point UK's The Esther Krakue Show. Today I'm joined by a man who needs no introduction, syndicated journalist and author, Douglas Murray. Lovely to have you with me.
Very good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. So today I just wanted to get started on, firstly, your book, The Madness of Crowds. I just wanted to understand a bit more about sort of what inspired you to write it exactly.
Well, it's my fifth book, and some people may be familiar with my last book called The Strange Death of Europe, which is on the migration crisis of 2015. Having trodden on perhaps one of the most sensitive, difficult issues of our time, I decided that I would put my boots on and jump into all of the others.
Yeah.
And The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race and Identity is my best run at what I think are the dementing issues of our time, the thing that are driving us mad.
Simply put.
Yeah. I do them one by one, as you know. I think everything to do with being gay, everything to do with women, relations between the sexes, everything to do with race, and absolutely everything to do with trans.
Yeah.
Now, all of these issues are ones that any sensible mortal being steers a million miles away from. But I think as a result, there's just a lot of discussion we are not having, and we are being invited to have discussions that are dementing, because they're discussions in which these traits, which in my view we should be trying to get beyond, as in that it's not of that much interest.
Yeah.
And these things are instead, at the point at which we should have been trying to get beyond them, being weaponized. And I argue, it's not the only thing that's going on, are being weaponized for a political project. And so I wanted to expose this, unravel it, and then invite people to do something better with their lives.
Then worry about these issues that seem to be everywhere. I mean, the title in and of itself, The Madness of Crowds, is quite sort of out there. Can you explain sort of, the reasoning behind the title specifically a bit more?
It's a reference to a book from the early 19th century by a Scots journalist called Charles Mackay, called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it's still, that book is still relatively well known in some circles, mainly in investment circles, because Charles Mackay in the 1840s described investment bubbles, as we would now recognize them, the tulip mania, the Mississippi bubble, moments when the stock market or the proto-stock market just goes crazy for something that is a bubble, a non-existent thing. And there are other chapters in that book about other similar crowd madnesses, but today it's most remembered, as I say, for the investment manias that have happened in the past. But I think that in our societies today, in countries like Britain and America, and countries, basically the Western liberal democracies, we've got crowd madnesses going on identity issues, to the extent that it's the matter of everyday's news. It's the conversation under all conversations. And perhaps most dementing of all is this invitation to work out where we are allowed to speak and think and act according to our place in this hierarchy we are told we can construct, which I think, I try to demonstrate, we've got no hope of constructing because it's inherently contradictory, inherently impossible. It's a game that cannot be played because it cannot be won.
Yeah. And I mean, sort of in my experience, I know recently I read that there's a massive sort of wind farm project going on in Turkey, and one of the sort of financing companies is the first gender finance project, which means sort of the project is being financed, but the companies that are carrying out have to sort of meet a criteria of gender equality within their companies. And so this is something that's spread, in terms of international trade. It's really consumed all aspects of our lives effectively. And in your book you mentioned that sort of there's been a huge leap towards sort of the conversations we've had around sort of gender and race. Why exactly is that a problem? Why is that massive sort of leap over the last 20 years a problem?
Well, my view is that each of the issues I write about, gay, women, race and trans, appeared in my own adult lifetime. I've just turned 40. Appeared to be becoming exactly what I would like them to become, which is, as I say, non-issues, issues we've got beyond. And each of them, it seemed to me, were like a train drawing into the desired destination. This isn't to say, obviously, there hasn't been racism, homophobia, sexism in the past, and it isn't to say that there isn't some today. It's not to say the whole thing's sorted, what are we talking about? It's to say we appeared to be drawing into the desired destination of equality and blindness about identity issues. And at exactly the moment that the train appeared to be drawing into the station, it suddenly got a head of steam, went shooting off down the tracks and started scattering people in its wake. What I mean by that is, each of these issues suddenly became weaponized. Now, I think this happened in the last 10 years. And I demonstrate how you can tell from internet search terms, among other things. It comes in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years becomes highly weaponized. So that everything becomes about race, everything becomes about sexual orientation, everything becomes about gender. And one of the striking things you exactly put your finger on is that there was a time 15 years ago where if I'd have written this book, people would have said, Douglas, you're talking about a sort of craziness which exists on some liberal arts college campuses in the US, sure, but it's not spilt beyond that. And as the example you just gave is another demonstration of, oh my gosh, has it gone beyond that?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the corporate world, the investment world.
You go to events, you see, women in banks, and it's the point is it's not a bad thing, but this the angle that it's being taken is quite sort of baffling in a sense. Why do you create a whole event based on sort of encouraging, women to enter banking or whatever when it should just be do what you want?
Right. Well,
it goes beyond sort of the goodwill. There's a politics behind it.
That's what I think is that, you see, in a way, all the biggest problems in life, it seems to me, begin in a good place.
Yeah.
So nobody wants anyone who has a competency in a subject to avoid that subject or that area because people like them have not been in it very much in the past. Yeah. So it makes sense if you say, look, a particular area hasn't got many women in it, and if that means that women are not going into it because they don't think women can, then that's something that should be addressed. But the problem is that something in the corporate world in particular that's been going on in the last few years looks like something different. There are several things you could interpret it as being. My view is that all of this is a post-financial crash thing. When we look at history, we know that when the economics go bad, other things go bad.
With it.
We know this from every revolutionary period. When the banks crashed in 2008, and the whole financial system came very, very close, there was an assumption afterwards that we would just sort of get on with business as usual. But as I say in the introduction to this book, it's not clear to me why, for instance, a young person who can't accumulate capital is going to have just some inherited love of capitalism. Or to put it another way, it's not obvious to me that somebody who believes they probably will never get on the housing ladder might be attracted to a system of values that claims to be able to solve every inequality on earth. You don't
just buy into a system because of, what your
habit.
Stands. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that people have been very loath to recognize that something big is going on here. Now, I'd add to that I think when the economics goes bad, your whole system becomes highly vulnerable to bad ideas. That's why we see a return of Marxism, even in the front bench of the opposition.
I mean, you have people in universities, lecturers, that are comfortably saying, I am a Marxist.
Yeah.
30 years ago, you wouldn't even say that.
No. Well, some would have done, but 20 or 30 years ago, they would have been on the downturn, wouldn't they? Because, after 89, it was hard to think that the revolution was still coming.
Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, in recent years, it's stepped up a gear, and
it's quite scary.
It's very scary. It's very scary, and also because the ideology I describe in The Madness of Crowds is partly Marxist in its nature. And that's why I do these interlude chapters about the deep substructure things in this. The interlude on Marxism is an attempt by me to show that the groundswell of a lot of this is Marxist. In the last century, the pyramid of oppression was that capital and the sort of aristocracy were at the top of the pyramid, and as you went down, you got till the working class were really the ones supporting it. And in the intersectional sort of identity politics version of the pyramid of oppression, the capital is still at the top, but it's minorities, LGBTQI and different racial minorities and women, and this is what's keeping up the pyramid of oppression. But the structure is Marxist.
Yeah.
As are a whole set of other things in it, and I think that people who dislike this or are suspicious of this, as they should be, have not taken this seriously enough.
Yeah.
I think this has snuck back in through this. Whilst we weren't really watching, and the mainstreaming of it in the last 10 years is, I think, in large part because the adults lost some of their self-confidence when the system almost crashed, and then decided to give some votive offerings to their opponents, so that the radical leftists and others who were pushing things like the intersectional claims based on identity, the corporate world and government and others sort of thought, okay, that's a tithe we'll pay.
Yeah. You're right. I think shaking their confidence is the right way to put it. I'm just curious, I mean, especially how you describe in the madness of crowds, what is the end game exactly? So like I mentioned, you have all these companies that are hosting women in this, African minorities or whatever in this. Is there a point where they'll just stop doing these events? Will they ever say, actually, we've gotten pretty close to sort of gender equality or sort of racial equality or what? Because I don't see an end game. Once you start doing these events, is it in 2024 that you'll be like, actually, no, I don't want to do it anymore?
That's one of the most crucial questions. When would you know if you've overreached?
Yeah. When would you stop doing these events? When would there be no point to it? And would you be willing to face the backlash?
And exactly.
Yeah.
And let's face it, the people whose job it is are highly unlikely to just voluntarily give up their six-figure salaries and say, we nixed it, we got it. I think it's very unlikely. I mean, there are corporations that I've studied in this book, where the human resources department is the only department that's growing.
Yeah.
They ain't giving up their salaries because they've found the solution any day soon.
The sweet spot. I mean, some people talk about, this whole, I suppose, resurgence of talking about, race and gender and all of this. And they say actually people are just being sensitive to the pronouns and people are being sensitive to the change that's happening. I mean, what do you make of people that are actually saying, the people on, let's say, the center right of things are just being a bit too, too tight with their privilege and not really willing to shift or change?
Well, the thing with this is that we get into this very, very dangerous terrain. What exactly is being asked and what exactly is able to be answered? So if the ask is people with a competency should not be held back from achieving what they are competent in doing because of any inherited or racial or sexual or any other characteristics, yes, absolutely, too damn right. If it is you need to do this because it's good for you for other reasons, then specify what the reasons are. If it's that particular minority groups, and of course minorities, women always get put in minorities as if they're a minority.
We're not 50% of the population.
It's slightly over. I mean, it's like, and if it's these minority groups bring a specific thing, then let us discuss what it is. I give this example, which has been much on my mind in recent years. Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, one of the most successful and accomplished women in the world, repeatedly said in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008 that if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, the financial crisis may not have happened. Now, I find that really interesting because nobody interrogates, what are you saying?
Yeah.
Are you saying women are absolutely the same as men? Women are
better than men?
Better than men? Are you saying they're the same and better?
Or they worse? I don't... But the thing is...
Are they more risk averse? If that's one of the claims that might be making.
Well, but yes, but when you say that, that means that kind of kills your argument that women and men are exactly the same.
Exactly.
I think for me, something like that would be kind of like a sexy snapshot because it just sounds nice. If it was Lehman Sisters instead of Lehman Brothers, that wouldn't have... It just sounds nice. It sounds like, like a Twitter moment. I don't understand what it means.
But I think I think what it means is equal and a bit magically better.
Okay.
Which I trace in each chapter is a temptation in each rights claim. I give the example in gay, the first chapter. Some people who are not happy with equal, I mean, I happen to be gay myself, so maybe this is the one I can say, but there's some gays who were never happy with equal and wanted to go to better. Now, I say this is the difference between gay and queer, where gay is just happen to be attracted to members of your own sex, and there's nothing else to do.
Yeah. That's a whole subsection in the book, the gay.
Yeah, and I find this really interesting because there were always people who were saying, no, gay, being attracted to your members of your own sex is just the first step in a larger political project. Yeah. Like some of us didn't get the memo, we were doing it wrong. And
brilliant.
And I give these examples of people who, in fact, it's happened to me, being sort of chucked out of the gay, church by the gay press because you didn't do the right thing politically. Yeah. Now, this happens on every single group where the naked political nature suddenly emerges.
Yeah, it exposes itself.
And, I mean, I give the example of Peter Thiel, the Silicon Valley tech billionaire, who in 2016 comes out with Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention, says, I'm proud to be gay, proud to be an American, proud to be supporting a Republican candidate for president. And the main gay magazine in America immediately says that Peter Thiel may sleep with men, but in no way is he gay. And I thought that when that happened, I thought, well, I've seen that elsewhere. I saw it when Germaine Greer was declared not a feminist. Yeah. And then you're like, okay. And then it happened to Kanye West, among many, many other black people in America.
He was disinvited from the cookout, which is some sort of African-American cultural...
Right. Because he was actually declared in the Atlantic magazine to not be black.
Yeah.
And this fascinates me because it's like, then you're saying... Right. What you're saying is, in these moments, being black isn't about being black. It's about a political project. Being gay isn't about being gay. It's a political project. And at this stage, you're thinking, well, I think that's really dangerous. That's really dangerous. First of all, it's highly insulting. I mean, did you get the memo, on exactly what we're meant to say because of characteristics? And secondly, it makes what should be, as I say, increasingly insignificant identity traits absolutely crucial and key. And that means that it can be played back. I mean, what happens if your political side loses? So I think this is really dangerous terrain that people are playing with for short-term political gain.
Well, I mean, part of what you just said, what happens if your political side loses? That's kind of what happened with Trump and Brexit. It's right. That's why we're seeing this whole sort of hysteria, effectively.
Yeah, it is connected, isn't it? Yes.
I think that's kind of fueled it. I mean, but sort of moving on from a few points you touched on, you said that young people are looking for meaning in life. Where do you think young people are getting it wrong these days?
I think in trying to find meaning in politics. Yeah. I mean, like you, I find politics very interesting. Yeah. But it's a hideous source of meaning in your life. It can be a wonderful way to meet other people. It can be a wonderful way to make, perhaps the best way to make meaningful changes in a country and in a society. Yeah. But it's not religion. It's not deep meaning. It's not purpose, or at least when it is, it goes badly wrong. Now, a lot of people have been encouraged in recent years to politicize every aspect of their lives, including their sex lives, including their private lives. And I invite people to do exactly the opposite, to depoliticize their lives, to hold things back from the political fight. And the real core, because one of the points of writing this book was to explain, analyze, expose, and pick apart the whole identity politics movement. But that's not the only purpose. The other purpose of the book is to say, particularly to young people, don't engage in this game because it's a game that cannot be played because it cannot be won. We will never sort out the privilege hierarchy. we will never totally nix where you're allowed to speak or listen or contribute in any discussion. It's going to be messier than that. But, crucially, don't spend your life obsessing about these identity issues, because there are other things you should be doing with your life. Much, much more meaningful things. And that's really the thing that struck me most in this generation that has lived through the weaponization of identity that's going on, is it's not going, even if we could do it, it's not that great a game to win. The great game for this next generation is to utilize the luck of being born at this time in societies like these, with the access to information that we have, and do things that are extraordinary. The least useful thing would be to spend so much of your life looking at your own navel that at the end of it, you've had a navel-gazing competition with all of your peers and worked out whose navel should win.
Should win, yeah. It's not about you, it's about them. And you're living your life for something else other than improving yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that, especially, younger people in the sort of higher education system that say, that there is something positive. So I suppose this victimhood culture, in the sense that it's kind of shed light on experiences of, minorities and people that we don't necessarily identify with in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily think. Do you think there's anything positive to come out of sort of this, I call it the victimhood culture, that's kind of groped the generation today?
I think there is. For instance, I have a section in the book, in the race chapter, on the studies phenomenon that came up in American colleges, where starts with black studies, gay studies. These are perfectly reasonable interests, really, because who can deny that there have been figures from, for instance, from history who have not had enough attention because they were black, or because they were gay, or because they were female. That's the case. Women's studies, the same thing. There's definitely utility to that, to say actually the whole thing was slightly skewed in the past. It was too closed off for this particular type of writer or individual or historical figure, and we haven't paid enough attention to that, and we should. I completely see the sense in that. Where does it go wrong?
When you spend $100,000 on studying gender studies and then expect a lovely salary or check.
Right, which you might get, of course, in the human resources department of a major. They may be onto something. It may not be as stupid as we think. But generally, I mean, it's well, you could trace several times when it had served its purpose. One would be actually those people who deserve that are now in the canon. Let me put it this way, in terms of American literature, which I write a bit about in the book, you wouldn't need a black studies department now to tell you about the greatness of James Baldwin. That's in the canon. He's not going anywhere, and he belongs to America and indeed to mankind. So that would be when you might have done the job. I would argue that, there's not that many writers anymore who are gay, who are sort of not being brought out from history and so on. But the real moment you would tell that you're doing something that's gone wrong is when you get into the realm of whiteness studies, which I write a bit.
I never understood that.
Whiteness studies is amazing. Whiteness, all the other things you see are celebratory.
Yeah.
And whiteness studies is set up to be problematizing.
Yeah.
That's where it goes wrong. It goes wrong when there is a study designed not to try to bring out forgotten voices, but to say everybody of this skin pigmentation, we've got to problematize.
Yeah.
Step aside. Shut up, step down. Now, that's where it goes wrong. Or to put it, I give the example in the book, I write about the famous example that went on, or maybe not famous enough, went on 3 years ago at Evergreen College in Portland, in Oregon, where Bret Weinstein, the biologist, and his wife are chased off campus with their children because Bret Weinstein, a lifelong Democrat, Bernie Sanders supporter, very much a man of the left, is told that year, the day of absence, which had happened at the college where for some decades black and other minority students and teachers and professors and others had left campus for a day to highlight the contribution they made to the campus. And this had gone on for some years and had been a rather sort of notable thing. And then a few years ago, the college announced that this year it was all white people leave campus day. Yeah. And Bret Weinstein says, no, that's the flip, that's
ridiculous.
That's doing it the other way around. That's just playing a really racial game back, not doing it. And of course he was hounded out for it. But it's things like that when it's gone too far. Yeah. But I think that it's a crucial question to ask people, when would you know?
Yeah.
Like, when would you know that you've gone past equal to better, or past equal to punishing for a bit, in order to sort of swing the pendulum at some point?
Yeah.
And who would declare it? You know?
Who would be brave enough to effectively shoot their career down to say, actually, this is enough? I mean, what can you imagine Barclays, that does, these sort of women in finance and all women in banking events? Who in Barclays, as a top executive, would say, actually, enough with this?
Right.
In 2019.
Haven't we seen it in politics in recent years? I mean, politics has been very keen to weaponize these things. Yeah. There's this oddity, it's happened in the last couple of years with people under the Theresa May government. You quite often heard, particularly Labour front benches, portraying Britain as sort of never having been more misogynistic and more hostile to women and so on.
And all the rest of it.
And you think, well, the head of state is a woman, the Prime Minister's a woman, a couple of Prime Ministers before that was a woman.
Some Supreme Court judges.
Supreme Court judges, and so on. So why would you be doing this? And this is one of the questions I had throughout the research of this book was, why is everything being presented as never having been worse at the exact point it's never been better in each of the cases? Yeah. So why all the post-2016 shouting about the incredible homophobia of society when it's never been better anywhere ever?
At any point, yeah. But this was happening sort of during the 2016 Brexit debate, and I just thought, Angela Merkel is probably the most powerful woman in Europe and in the world right now. What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah.
How far is this conversation going to go before we realize that people are actually using it for purposes that it's not meant to be?
Yes. We had, maybe we shouldn't get too specific on British politics, but Harriet Harman running for Speaker recently gives the interview and says, I think it's time for a female Speaker. The Speaker before last was a woman. Betty Boothroyd was a woman, undoubtedly, and a brilliant speaker.
Well, she might not have identified as a woman. I don't want to make
I'm fairly confident that Betty Boothroyd identified.
You know what? I don't want anyone knocking on my door and asking me questions, so I will just leave it at that. Someone who seems female. Speaking of madness of crowds, I wanted to ask you what you make of sort of this Greta Thunberg and sort of the hysteria surrounding her. I mean, that in itself, whether you are a supporter of her or against her, is the definition of the madness of crowds. This is the 16-year-old girl who grew up in Sweden, a very developed country. I'm pretty sure she hasn't faced much hardship, sort of where living standards are concerned. And she's effectively taken the world by storm. She has graced the internet with fabulous memes of giving Donald Trump evils and being fabulously ignored. I mean, what do you make of her?
Well, there you go. You see, it's quite hard to make me worried about treading onto an issue, but here we go.
Okay.
There are a couple of things I decided not to do, maybe because I've put them off for another book. I don't quite know yet.
This is an exclusive, guys.
There were two obvious ones that I could have done but left out. One was the whole issue around mental health, which I think it fits in a way around these as well, because like these issues of gay, race, women and trans, it's clearly becoming one of the issues underneath other issues. Yeah. And it's really complex, and again, starts in a good place, but I have very mixed views about where it's ending up. So I could have done mental health, but decided to put it off for another day. And the other one I put off and decided not to do, partly because a lot of other people have, and also partly because I thought it was just slightly different, is exactly this, the green issue. But you are completely right that this is part of the same phenomenon. And in fact, in recent days in particular, a very striking example of the phenomenon. My view is that there was never a chance that we were going to be the first people in human history to have nothing to do. And
increasingly it seems that way.
If you grow up in the 21st century in Europe or America, you have the same instincts, the same desires, the same needs as people have throughout history, but almost nothing speaks to them. Organized religion, for better or worse, has pretty much fallen away in countries like ours. The deep explanations for what we're doing here, therefore, start to go missing. The deep political explanations of the 20th century all turned into nightmares. So we're in this strange void, which I wrote about in The Strange Death of Europe at more length, but I pick up on here, which is, what exactly are we meant to be doing with our time? And nothing in the culture tells you. It says, find meaning where you will, or make money and enjoy spending it. But that doesn't cut it for everyone. In fact, I don't think it cuts it for almost anyone.
They're kind of just both hedonist-based ideas, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all just about, if it feels right, do it.
Right. And the thing is, again, I mean, not to go back to this thing of the financial crash, but that might work as long as living standards keep going up for everyone.
Yeah.
But if they don't, or if they go stagnant, I think that these calls to meaning become much more pertinent. And I think that the green hurricane of recent years is clearly this now. It's what I say these identity issues have started to try to become, which is the explanation for what we should be doing. Like, fight the next frontier of rights, and you will be heroic in the eyes of your successors and esteemed and admired by your peers. That's better than nothing. Now the green...
It's just, it's for me, it's a bit mind-boggling, because at what point, where does appreciation and humility fit into all this? Do you know what I mean? That's what I don't understand. You know,
Yeah.
you could have someone in sort of 20th century Russia that's living sort of, you know, in Stalin Russia, that's dealing with all these horrible issues of probably, you know, famine, starvation, and all the rest of the, you know, the horrible aspects of living within, you know, Soviet Russia. But there's a level of appreciation there that actually, at least I had food to eat today.
Right.
Or I saw my family member and they weren't dragged off into some hole by the KGB. You know, there's, I'm struggling to find where humility and appreciation fits in anywhere anymore.
Well, you cite two of the least popular words of our time. I mean, seriously, when did you last hear anyone talking about either of these things? It's like I describe in Madness of Crowds the way in which power has been seen by people who've imbibed too much Foucault, among others, knowingly or otherwise. Power has been described as like the main force in life. And I say, no, it isn't. If you said to most people, what do you find meaning from in your life? Almost nobody other than a few psychopaths would say power. Yeah. They would say love, friends, family, things I love. And so there's this weird, perverse situation we've got into where qualities that we know are qualities are totally absent. And that leads, among other things, to this thing of the hysterical mindset. Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in their book, Coddling of the American Mind, go into this a bit. But the demonstrable attitude in the last 10 years where hysteria starts to take hold on some of these issues, so that, again, your society is presented as uniquely homophobic, uniquely sexist, uniquely racist, and so on. But just quickly on the Greta thing, I mean, at this point, it's impossible to deny that there's a religious element to what's happening.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, when you see her speech at the UN...
What did she say? What was that phrase? You've stolen my childhood from me. And I thought, Are you joking? That for me, that completely sort of highlights, the sort of almost religious hysteria behind this movement.
Didn't you think that was a turning point, particularly there?
I thought that just looked like a thoroughly insane person.
Yeah.
That kind of sent chills down my spine, in the sense that you are someone who, for better or worse, could have had a harder life than you have had now.
And
you're sitting in the UN and telling people that drive cars to work that they've stolen your childhood from you. How ungrateful can you be?
And I mean, the sheer lack of any understanding of what life has been like for most people on the planet still.
Yeah.
But here, I mean, by the way, it's not just her. The whole construction of the Greta phenomenon is to make her impossible to oppose.
No, that's
I mean, I've actually written about this in this week's Spectator, so I'm not jumping in entirely bootless to this particular thing. But clearly what it is it's a way to smuggle a particular type of extreme green ideology in most successfully, because the challenge is, it's not really a challenge, it's a threat. Go on.
It's kind of like if Hello Kitty carried a gun. That's how I see it.
Yes,
it's
a
really
fully armed Hello Kitty.
Hello Kitty.
I mean, yeah, it's something like, I dare you.
Yeah.
I dare you to oppose the 16-year-old autistic girl. And actually, as I say in The Spectator this week, I've occasionally thought when watching this roll out, what exactly are the rules here? And let's say I find a 14-year-old badly disabled Danish boy who loves fossil fuels. Does he win? Does Greta have to shut up in his presence?
Yeah.
Or
Does
her
he win the hierarchy? Well, no, because he'd have to identify as a woman.
Let's say I find a 14-year-old disabled Danish woman, trans
yeah.
woman who loves fossil fuels. It's mainly into trans and fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
What happens?
Well,
So,
I mean,
I'm
that would be something I would pay to watch.
answers on a postcard. Applications on a
open
postcard.
Exactly.
But this is disturbing because the reaction of people, or the non-reaction, the unwillingness to engage in the conversation, the unwillingness to engage in the actual debate, the willingness of the adults to sit in the room and be flagellated. I mean, look, if we're
taking environmental advice from a 16-year-old autistic girl from Sweden, we've really lost our way. I'm just saying.
I think we've lost our way in that we have become incapable of having the discussion about what we should be doing. You see, if somebody comes along of any age and says, I think that there is a problem so bad that you are going to have to upend and indeed end the best system of growth that has ever been found by mankind. A system of growth that has taken half of the people out of extreme poverty that were in it at the beginning of this century, in this century so far. And if they said, this problem is so severe, you have to all crash the entire system of growth you have, then I would like to have an argument and discussion about that. I wouldn't want to take it on trust.
At the very least.
And I wouldn't want to take it on blackmail, moral blackmail in particular. And yes, it's an extraordinary phenomenon, this. And the only thing we can do is to learn from history on this. I mean, the most obvious similarity is the Children's Crusade. But I said to a colleague recently, it's the sort of thing that makes you understand events in history a bit better, isn't it?
The driving factors behind sort of some of the things
the
that you don't
irrationality.
understand. Exactly.
The
You
irrationality.
think human beings, from the 20th or 19th century were so different from us, but they're really not.
We're not different from them.
Yeah.
We're not better than them. The presumption of modernity is that we are better than people in the past because we know more than people in the past.
Yeah.
And actually, we are just as vulnerable to
Human
crowd
instincts
madnesses, to strange phenomena that come along. We're just as... So my challenge then would be, identify what the things are that we're doing that are mad and try to stop doing them. Try to identify what our successors will look at and say they did what. Try to work it out now. And I reckon that the subjects I write about in this book, the weaponization of them, and things like being prey to a form of extraordinary blackmail about our entire economic system, are the sorts of things which in the future, people, the near future, people will say, what were they thinking in the 21st century?
You know, what we had gone mad, effectively.
And it's easiest for that to happen when you think you're being most rational.
Yeah. All right. Well, we just like to finish off every episode with some quick fire questions.
Oh,
don't think about them too much. They're just, you know, just random choice questions. All right.
Yeah. Random choice. We have random choice answers.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true, actually. Yeah. All right. Are you ready?
Fire away.
Okay. Right. Conservatism or libertarianism?
Conservatism.
Okay. House of Commons or the House of Lords?
For me to be in, or a preference?
For you to be in.
Oh, definitely the Lords. Yeah, I'm holding out for an earldom. Yeah.
That's quite the goal. All right, okay, the US or Europe?
Again, for what? Europe to live in, the US if I was wanting to start a career. Possibly. But Europe to live in.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that might be the choice. All right, Trump or Hillary?
Oh, why did you have to ask that question? Can I pass?
No, I can't, unfortunately. I don't know which makes me feel worse.
I mean, I feel like I'd want to vote for Trump and then take it back, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I think just on the basis of what we know of Hillary.
Yes. Okay, hang on. This is a way to get out of this question.
Oh.
As a journalist, the Trump era is much more interesting, so I'd vote Trump.
just for the news factor. All right.
Just for the material.
Exactly.
The material.
It's
much better material.
He's created an entire new economy of journalists.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are days you wake up and you think, what?
All right, last question. Cameron or Tony Blair?
I
don't know who I would choose, actually.
Well, again, I'm going to dodge it slightly by saying, but we'll answer it. Tony Blair for simple political brilliance.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't agree with a lot of things that Tony Blair did. I agreed with some. I suppose it's the same with all political leaders. But in terms of sheer political brilliance, yeah. I definitely... And maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't
for the
say
Brexit vote? I don't know. That's the thing, because I would probably say, you're right, Blair for just political brilliance. I didn't agree with a lot of what he said, but I don't traditionally vote Labour, but I would have voted for him.
Well, I did vote Labour once in Tony Blair's time, yeah.
Yeah, I did as well. Well, no, I didn't, but...
When I was a lot younger, when I knew absolutely nothing, I once voted Liberal Democrat.
Oh, God.
I know.
As someone who went to university and knows the tuition fee hikes...
This was before then.
Oh, I still can't forgive you. That's not acceptable.
You have teased out my dirtiest secret just there.
What?
There.
That you voted Lib Dem. I voted for Jeremy Corbyn at one point.
That's much worse.
I know.
That's much worse.
I know.
Oh, okay. I don't feel so bad now.
Yeah, okay. I'll let you have that one. Yeah, no, I don't know what was happening. I think I had too much chocolate ice cream. All right. Thank you so much for coming, Douglas. It's been a pleasure having you.